Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Rob Bowl, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Okay, welcome to this episode of the Move Your Business Forward podcast. I'm today delighted to be joined by Sally Ann, who's joining me from Reality HR. Sally Ann, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're going to talk about a particular topic today, and I think it's important that I mention what time we are right now, or date specifically. So we're mid-July 2024. We've just had the election and a new government, and what we're going to talk about today isn't necessarily to do with that, because I think there's still lots of noise coming from that, which is going to evolve over the next few months. But there's a really important change to employment law that's important for every SME business, which is going to be in effect later in October this year, so only a few months away. And I think anyone that's not come across this probably needs to have their ears prick up and just take note of what they need to know here. So just thought it's worth mentioning. We're now mid-July, coming into summer holidays, and at the end of the summer going into October, people need to make sure they're on top of this, right? So hopefully that's gauged people's interest. So what are we going to talk about, Sally Ann, as a point?
So it's called the Workers' Protection Act 2023, and you may well have heard about it. It's been knocking around for about a year in consultation. As Rob says, comes into effect on the 26th of October and is an amendment to the Equality Act. Now, that all sounds very legalistic and boring, but actually it is really important to businesses, because the implications of not understanding and making the changes will have both commercial implications as well as legal. So it is really, really important. We work with about 180 businesses, entities, organisations, and we're talking to all of our clients about this. And it's really key that businesses start to take some action now to be prepared for this legislation. It represents a significant shift from a focus on addressing incidents in the workplace after they occur to actually preventing them from happening in the first place. That's the key fundamental change that we all need to get our heads around.
So just to explain that, to reiterate what that means. So rather than there being kind of after an event that might happen in the workforce and the implications of how you deal with it, this is before an event's even happened. How have you planned to mitigate that even coming up in your workplace, right? Which is a massive change.
Exactly. So the Worker Protection Act is all about a proactive duty for employees to take reasonable steps, and I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. Reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. So the definition of reasonable steps is still to be fully defined, but it's anticipated that reasonable steps is going to be a really high hurdle for businesses to jump, and the new government may well extend this to say all reasonable steps. So when you start to think about the implications of that for business, it can be quite significant, which is when you start to really unravel this legislation. It's why it's so important businesses start to give it thought now. So really, employers need to be actively creating a very safe and respectful work environment, and that includes things like making sure there are comprehensive policies in place, regular training, and very clear reporting mechanisms when there are any instances of sexual harassment. So, but again, just going back to this point, all reasonable steps is the thing we need to really get our heads around.
And with this, I mean, obviously, some companies are already doing a lot of these things because it's just best practice. And I guess someone who thinks they've got everything in place could easily trip up by not actually having everything that's deemed to be this kind of reasonableness, I guess, test. Who's going to be policing this or checking this, or how are you going to always just check off whether you're making the right steps? And I guess that's what you're going to talk about now.
Yeah, I think there are some key things that businesses need to be thinking about, some key steps really. So firstly, look at the policies you've got, which I just mentioned, and make sure they're really robust and comprehensive. So in particular, policies around anti-harassment and grievance. And if you don't have them, then now's the time to get those policies in place. We come across many businesses that don't have policies, or policies that are not fit for purpose, and they need to be, going back to that point around businesses proactively making sure that they've done everything that they reasonably can. And then also training programs for everybody, so all employees understand, you know, what is sexual harassment, what constitutes harassment, how to report it, and really importantly, what are the consequences of such behaviour in the workplace. And additionally, making sure that the leadership and management team have that additional training so they know how to properly and sensitively handle complaints and foster a very respectful work environment. I should say one of the reasons why this is so important is that employment tribunals will have the ability to uplift any successful claims by 25%.
Oh, wow.
So that is quite significant. So at the outset, I talked about this being a legal and a commercial change, and that's where the commerciality comes in. So, you know, we need to pay attention because it's going to be expensive if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Reporting channels are going to be really important. So making sure there is a really clear, accessible and confidential reporting channel. We come across so many instances where employees don't feel they can raise complaints because they don't feel they're going to be listened to or the information will be treated confidentially.
Mhm.
Risk assessments, making sure that any potential areas of concern are risk assessed and obviously remedy put in place now. And it's going to be very different for different organisations. If you think about, you know, a 24/7 remote working operation versus a 9 to 5 office or hybrid operation, it's going to be very different. So that needs careful thought and it needs to be very applicable. And then a real culture of accountability is important as well, where everybody in an organisation really understands what their role is, because we all have a role to play in this.
So it's almost targeted training at different levels within the organisation as well, isn't it? To understand all the implications here as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. It is about education and training. So all employees need to understand what it means. There's a greater onus on managers and leaders to really know how to appropriately manage situations if and when they occur.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, understood. Is there anything else as in those things? I've got a couple of questions, but I don't want to ruin your flow, Sally.
No, that's all right. You go with your questions. That's fine.
Because I think one of the tricky things here is there's obviously certain environments employees have that are within their control.
Yeah.
Their control, and then there's stuff that's very difficult to control. So if you've got people in one office, you don't have any outside influence in that office. You've just got your own people that you've trained, you've made aware, they know all the things. That's one environment to deal with. You've then got an environment where you might have external consultants that come in. You might have external influence that comes in that's beyond your control, or you can't necessarily ensure that those people have got the level of training that you might have given your own internal team. And then you've got the fact that your employees are going to be out and about. Maybe they're with clients, maybe they're going out networking or going and doing their training somewhere else, and things happen. So how does that all work? How do you control the things that are not so easy to have an eye on or see because you've got external influences, or just it's a different environment anyway?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, there's no way that any organisation can control the behaviour of every person at every moment. It's an impossible thing. So really, it's about those points that we've touched on already, which is doing everything you can to take those reasonable steps. Mm-hmm. And if it does end up being defined in law as all reasonable steps, which is, making sure people are properly educated, you have proper process in place, reporting, training, and so on and so forth. And I think it's really important to say as well that the definition of sexual harassment legally it's about, violating dignity, creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading environment, whether intentional or not. And that doesn't necessarily mean in those four walls of an office. Mm. It can also, it also applies if it's not directed. So, if I overheard something or saw something with a third party, that's included as well in the definition. So that's where the reach of the employer is going to be really difficult in terms of every different scenario that their employees are going to be in, which is why all the measures you can put in place now around education and understanding and proper process will help mitigate should there be a problem. But it's going to be really challenging. It also covers volunteers as well, actually. Okay. So if you're an organisation where you have people volunteering, that they should be treated in exactly the same way as employees in terms of those measures and education pieces.
And what about salaried versus contract type staff as well? How do you, or contractors you bring in? Is
exactly the same? Exactly the same. Yeah. So it's about that the responsibility and the onus being on the employer to properly mitigate through the measures that they put in place.
Okay, perfect. No, well, that makes sense. So I guess October's not far away, and I mean there is a few changes potentially going to happen, because I think there's lots with the new government that's coming. There is changes happening. I mean, this fundamentally is not going to change, right? You're thinking there could be any slight tweaks or anything significant different, or do you think,
I think we're pretty clear in terms of what it will include, and there will be more information over the coming weeks for sure. And the actual definitions, I think, will be important, particularly around that definition of reasonable steps. But I think, the important thing to remember is the commercial risk, and also the risk of reputational damage and all those things if businesses find themselves with a claim and they haven't put in place proper process and procedure to mitigate and protect themselves and their employees, really. But it's also very much about having the right culture in an organisation. And we should all want to have a culture of respect and inclusion, where, regardless of who we are and what we are, we all feel safe and included in the environment we work in.
100%. And to be honest, a lot of this just seems like normal best practice anyway, right? There should be nothing here that is really new, or, oh yeah, we're doing this, we've never done it before. It should just be best practice anyway, right? That's the main.
You would hope so. You would hope so, but I suspect there'll be a few cases going through the courts over the coming years, as this is tested, for sure.
And so the commercial element you touched on, you said there's an uplift in this potential. So obviously, I mean, for some big companies, I'm assuming that could be a big number. For SMEs, it could be significant as well. I mean, what are we talking about in terms of commercial risk to?
So if you have if you have a successful claim against you, and with a 25% uplift applied for sexual harassment in the region of £50,000, so for a small business, for my business, that would be significant. For most small businesses, that would be significant. So, and again, we won't know the true numbers until it starts being tested through the courts. So, but yeah, the 25% uplift is significant.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. So, I mean, takeaways from this. I mean, you've said there's a whole range of things that people can do to take the right steps. There's not much time really between now and October, and I guess this is not just necessarily you do it once and you're done. It's got to be something you keep revisiting and keep training and keep improving. And I guess that's part of demonstrating you've got a process around this, which is the reasonable steps keep getting reviewed and improved where necessary. What would you suggest as step one? Because I think one thing you mentioned is some of this stuff, it's got to be in your contracts, in your policies, etc. And some people might not have had them reviewed since they started their business, or not reviewed, or there might be people on different contracts who've never seen updated versions. So what would you say the main things that anyone should go and just have a look at and take steps to do?
So I think the first thing is that audit. So audit your policies in particular. Hopefully your policies are non-contractual. They're not bound in your employment contracts, but just look and see what you have in place, and that will then help you identify any gaps or areas needed for improvement. There'll be lots of information on the internet. ACAS will have guidelines, and organisations such as ourselves are very happy to help. So there is a plethora of information out there to help with putting in place the appropriate policies and practices. And then from then on, it's about the training, the briefing, and making sure it's regular. As you say, Rob, it's not just a one-off and we've ticked the box and we're done. It needs to be iterative and needs to be a regular part of a business's cycle of education. And then engage with employees, make sure that they know that they have a forum to be listened to, and they understand how they can be listened to and how they can report things, and then make sure that there is that culture ingrained in everything that the business does, which fosters that safe environment for everybody.
So one other point here, I think, is if a company's thinking, okay, we need to do something about this, we need to just make sure we've making the right steps. It might feel like you're creating some noise in an organization about it, and some might perceive that as good. Some might see it as, oh, what's happened then? Well, what's happened? And I think it's all about positioning, isn't it? To make sure this is a thing we're doing, not just because something's happened and we're kind of trying to keep it quiet. It's not just, we're doing it because of the law, because this is a good thing to do. So how would you suggest the company positions a review of this and how they communicate it? Because I think that's a key thing, because you don't want to make anyone feel they've done something necessarily wrong, or the company's realized they're wrong. How do you position something like this, which is really just improving a business, but improving how it looks after its people and how it provides a safe environment. But there are tricks to bring that into a business as a change or a shift. So how would you suggest people communicate it?
I think it's key to think about how you communicate currently in your organisation. So utilise the mechanisms you already have for communicating. Make sure you're communicating in a way that isn't alarmist. It's informative, it's educational, and it's commensurate with what changes need to be made. Think about setting up forums to impart information and for consultation with employees and discussion about what's appropriate in the environment and the workplace you've got. And then just make sure that it's factual, it's regular, it's balanced, and listening to employees is really key. Because it isn't something that is just for the decision makers, the leaders in an organisation to impose. It's something that everybody has a responsibility to understand and adhere to. Therefore, that clear consultation and discussion is going to be really key to make sure it's a very collaborative approach to the understanding and the changes that need to be made.
Yeah, no, sure, understood. And I guess, doing training, getting people either assigned internally for this kind of work or bringing people in to help, make sure you've got it right. There is a time cost to that, but also money cost to that as well.
Yeah,
I know a lot of SMEs have just feel like the cost of employing people is just going up and up and up all the time with everything involved with that. I mean, how would you suggest people do this in a practical way that's not going to be a massive cost of time, money, investment? And because in a minute you've got to do this and you should be doing it, but how do you make sure you're not kind of overspending or committing too much?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I think the days of shipping everyone into a training room in one hit are probably certainly post pandemic are not what we do as much anymore. I think we certainly use webinars a lot, lunch and learn sessions, short to the point training and communication sessions, which are not hopefully too impactful in terms of someone's working day, but the message is delivered in an appropriate way. So there's lots of ways of doing it. Some organisations, they rely on the town halls and things like that for big pieces of communication, but it can be flexed really. It doesn't have to be an expensive and time-consuming operation to make sure that people fundamentally understand. And of course, as we are today, recording things is so easy. So a session can be run that people then watch back on their own. So there's various ways of doing it. So I would say, don't just say, well, I can't afford it. Be creative around what's right for you and what's right for your business, particularly when you've got, a remote workforce, 24/7 workforce, those kinds of things where, it's not physically possible or practical to bring everyone together in a more traditional format.
Yeah, cool, perfect. And I guess just as we wrap this up, the biggest tip you would give anyone, one tip I think would be just you've got to look at this now because time's ticking away. And
Yeah.
I think with any of the changes that are going to come up, and there will be some with the new Labour government, you've got to be on top of these things, and that's where I think just being involved with some of the webinars that you guys do, or just being open to what's going on in this space, and having either a champion in the business. You could have a head of people or a person responsible for that. Some people don't; they're not that big, but you need someone that's going to take a bit of ownership over this and make sure they're on top of things, don't you? So one is do something about it as a tip. Any other top tip you give any business owner listening to this?
I mean, definitely don't ignore it. I think you're absolutely right that we have many things coming down the line. We heard the first 100 days this week, so we know what's coming from an employment perspective. So there's going to be lots of things businesses need to change in order to meet and fulfil the employment legislation requirements. So don't ignore it. There'll be this and there'll be other things which fundamentally impact how we employ people. So and just manage it appropriately for your organisation. Don't be frightened of it. Seek advice if you need to. We're very happy to chat things through just to provide some support and input to help businesses get to where they need to be in terms of this and other changes which we know are coming down the line.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Well, look, thanks, Sally. And that's been really useful and hopefully some useful tips for people to engage with there. So thank you. Look, thanks for joining. I'm sure there'll be some other topics we'll talk about in the future. But today, thank you very much, Sally, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.